Hello and welcome to Farm Journal Live. I'm Editor Clint Griffiths coming to you from our newsroom here in northern Indiana. We have a couple big reports out of USDA today, and of course we're seeing our major grains making a little movement today, up double digits at the midday here as we get those numbers digested through the market. Let's get right to those numbers. USDA revising its prospective planting numbers significantly. The department calling for 92 million acres of corn. That's compared to the near 97 million it expected back in March. Soybeans increasing from March, but only a little bit, now sitting at 83.8 million acres expected to be planted. However, there's still quite a few acres of soybeans to go in. Wheat also down from the prospective plantings estimates, nearly 1 million acres less than last year. USDA also releasing its quarterly grain stocks report. Corn coming in at 5.2 billion bushels. That's about even with a year ago. Soybeans in at 1.3 billion, down 22% from a year ago. And all wheat stocks just over 1 billion bushels. That's also about even with last year. Let's bring in our experts today. We've got AgriTalk's Chip Flory, Allendale's Rich Nelson. Fellas, what's your take on these numbers? What was the biggest surprise in this report? Chip, we'll start with you.
Well, I think based on the way that the market is reacting, the biggest surprise has to be in the corn acreage number. You go back to the March prospective plantings report, that 97 million came in above the highest pre-report trade guess. We had a wide range of trade guesses, 4 million wide on the range of guesses, but today in June, we come in below the lowest of the trade guesses going into this June acreage report. So based on that and the variability and the market reaction that we're seeing so far, I've got to say that the acreage report for corn was probably the biggest surprise. And the other reason that I'm saying that is because it offset what is a negative June 1 quarterly grain stocks report for corn.
Rich, your opinion here? Were you watching that acreage number, and is that, you think, the biggest mover here?
Certainly right. And oftentimes in this report, the corn acreage number is not the big mover. Oftentimes the grain stocks is what gives us the surprise. So today's number implying a 5 million acre drop. This was the second largest drop on this June report since 1980. So even surpassed 1995's drop of only 3 million acre decline. So definitely a good surprise for the trade here today.
Rich, go ahead. Go ahead, guys.
I was just going to say, if we would have just got a June 1 stocks number on corn within 50 million bushels of the pre-report trade expectations, in other words, just put it at 5 million bushels, boy, this really would have been a gangbuster. We had a trading range of 40 cents a year ago on report day. We could be looking at a much more significant move than what we're seeing today if it wasn't for that grain stocks number coming in well above trade expectations. I say that because the funds are so heavily short. If we could have got both reports working for us today, man, I think the funds would be running out of the short side of the market.
Rich, what was your take on the stocks here today?
You know, certainly this does give us a little surprisingly lower than expected feed use for that March, April, May period. Now, that's if you assume that these feed residual is actual a representation of feed residual. But bottom line for us, very good to see that the acreage change, implying almost 1 billion bushels of production now off the table for new crop, certainly overshadowed the disappointing grain stocks numbers.
Now, if we want to talk a little bit of soybeans, fellas, let's talk planted acreage. Let's talk the stocks there. Chip, your take on planted acres for soybeans. You know, we kept talking about, hey, we're going to shift more acres into beans. USDA saying here, not as many as we think.
Right. Still, the acreage number came in within the range of guesses. In March, the prospective plantings number came in at the low end of trade expectations, and here in June, it comes in at the low end of trade expectations again. So it fits within the range, though. I think is positive. June 1 grain stocks on soybeans came in just under the average pre-report trade guess. I think it was down 6 million bushels below the average pre-report guess. So both of them are slightly positive, I would say. I think this helps to build what has become a much more positive story for soybeans going forward.
Rich, and I think that's as we look at the markets today, soybeans reacting positively. What was your take on those numbers from both an acreage standpoint and the grain standpoint, grain stocks? How about Rich? You may be having a, do you hear me now maybe? Let's check in on, Rich, what was your take on the soybean acreage number and the grain stocks number for soybeans? Yeah, it looks like we may have lost Rich. We'll try to get back to him. Rich, just jump in if you hear me there. Chip, as we go through, the rest of this report, we start working forward. What do you see as we go into July? Does this set the stage for more movement ahead?
Yeah, I think it definitely does, because it creates a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace. As you said,
all right, looks like we're having some technical difficulties today, which that's par for the course. We'll make sure we get these guys back on the horn and see if we can't wrap up again with some more information for everybody. Of course, if you'd like the latest information, you can head over to agweb.com. We're going to be featuring all of our analysts, some market report information, some reaction to these reports. Of course, you can check the markets and see what they're doing. Go over to agweb.com for the very latest. Okay, maybe we've got them both back here, fellas. Let's try this one more time. Chip and Rich Nelson joining us. All right, Rich, I got you back. Why don't we start with your reaction to soybeans? What was your take on the soybean planted acreage and stocks report today?
For the most part, pretty much neutral within the general trade discussion before this report started, and certainly combine this with maybe a little weather impact. It's really interesting. This market is looking at some upside here today. And also there are some gaps on the charts directly ahead as well to fill, and maybe a little better news up ahead, because soybeans did not have this problematic long-term situation like corn had. So certainly allows them maybe a little more upside at the next couple of days.
Yeah, and Chip, I was asking you there before we lost you about what does this set the stage for the rest of the summer going forward? Does this change the game as we move into the rest of 2020?
Well, I think it might. Part of the reason that I'm saying that is I believe the total combined on corn and soybean acres here, 175.8 million. That's down from 180.5. If we would have maintained at 180.5 and just moved those acres around between corn and soybeans, I don't know if it would change the story that much. But when we take that much off the total for corn and soybean acres, I think it does give us a better opportunity. I don't want to get crazy excited, because the demand side of the market, like Rich was talking about on corn, there's just so much uncertainty there. We don't know exactly how phase one is going to play out for us as we get into the final quarter of the 2019-20 marketing year on soybeans. So I don't want to get crazy, but I do think that just the financial conditions out there have been tough enough that when guys got their corn acres planted this year, it's not like they just kept planting. They pulled the pin.
Yeah, right.
And that's a shift in attitude that we've seen from what we've seen in the past.
And I think it feels like, everything going on with the coronavirus, our expectations from March have shifted quite a bit. Rich, was that your read that, kind of the plans we made in late March or even early March when that survey was first put out have really kind of changed a lot of this story, especially on the corn side, given all of the challenges with ethanol and demand there?
Certainly true. And it's also really important to point out that these numbers didn't all go from lost corn acres directly onto soybeans. This went to lost corn acres in some respects, some preventive plan as well, and some other factors. So very positive to see, at least in this case, not the burdensome story. Now, keep in mind, we're not out of the woods yet. We still have South American planting this coming fall. Brazil will be planting even more acres. So it's very good news we have here today, but it doesn't change the big picture situation, though.
Yeah, Rich, we've been talking quite a bit about some of the weather situation out there. Do you think there's enough weather factors at play here to see this market move, up toward that $4 mark? Or are we just still hoping at this point that would be a long shot?
I'm not sure if we'll get $4 myself, but I certainly would suggest that as long as this forecast does hold, at least give us by the end of the week, we can probably argue maybe a little more strength for a little more of a short-term summer rebound in pricing.
Yeah.
What do you think, Chip? You agree?
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And a big part of the reason for my agreement is the fact that the funds, and I mentioned it earlier, but the funds are so short in the corn market that this should be a trigger to get them out of some of those funds. And to emphasize what Rich was talking about, that we didn't just lose corn acres and shift them over to soybeans. The principal crop acres in March, the estimate was 319.1 million. 319.1 million. In today's report, we're down to 311.8 million. This is a big decline in overall plantings, and I like Rich was saying, I think that it should change some attitudes in these markets for the summer months. Yeah.
Do we know yet about feed? Did we feed more corn to hogs, given all of the lack of DDGs and everything else, and the movement that we're seeing over the last couple of months in our livestock industries? Rich, any indications there that we got any adjustments to that?
As we all know, the feed residual numbers are kind of more or less an unknown demand category, not exactly feed residual. So keep that in mind. Now, in the first 2 quarters of this year, we ran feed use about 19% over last year, and then the last quarter was 10% over last year. Now, for this report, this would have implied feed use, if I remember right, just a little bit under last year of all things. So I hate to get in the arguments about what feed use actually is, but in this case, this would have implied weaker than expected feed use in this March, April, May period.
What do you think on that, Chip?
Clinton, I think you've identified something that's going to be a wild card for this September 1 stocks as we try to get a better handle on just how much corn was used for feed, because we know in the hog rations, we've actually increased the amount of corn that we are feeding in the ration.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean that we are feeding more overall corn. And it's going to be, it's just going to be a wild card for that September 1 number. The corn for feed use, it's, as Rich said, it's always tough to predict. It's an unknown that we're trying to estimate out there. There's no hard numbers on it, and that's going to make it really dicey going into that September 1 number at the end of the marketing year.
Well, there are plenty of unknowns, fellas. Obviously, we got to get through this growing season and then see what else 2020 deals us, which is, as we know, has been a challenge. Here we go, ready for July. We'll see what July brings. All right, thank you both for joining us today on Farm Journal Live. Really appreciate the insights. I know folks do at home as well. If you'd like to keep up with the very latest and happening around the agricultural industry, go over to agweb.com. Join us on our host of other outlets and social media platforms if you'd like to get the latest information. Of course, Chip, I'm sure you'll be talking about this on AgriTalk later today, so join him over on AgriTalk. And Rich, we'll see you again tomorrow on Ag Day in the morning, giving us a little bit of analysis. Thank you all for joining us for Farm Journal Live. We'll be back again tomorrow. Thanks for watching. It started as social distancing, self-isolation, and caring for loved ones. A time for agriculture to be proud, to be essential. Now, it's changing. While states start to reopen and jobs resume, out here, the clouds are building. The path is uncertain. It's not the first time, it won't be the last. But we'll farm on. This soil is soaked in generations of sweat, of reinvention, of grit. Farm on is a calling. It's a mantra, a mindset. When the horizon dims and things turn dark, we'll find the light. We may be doing this for you, but we're also doing it for them. 2020, now's the time to farm on.